Well, simply arresting and incarcerating everyone doesn't work. I think we are just now starting to understand what works, and we have a lot more learning to do. I think that learning and that innovation needs to really be the hallmark of the next 10, 15 years of transforming the criminal justice system in America.
When we think about criminal justice reform, we often think about activism, politics, or legal advocacy. We don't normally think about mass incarceration as a problem that philanthropy can solve. But Ana Zamora is out to change that. As the director of criminal justice reform at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Zamora was responsible for handing out millions of dollars in grant money to organizations working on the ground to implement practical solutions to mass incarceration. And as founder and CEO of the Just Trust, an independent criminal justice reform investment organization, she's distributing $350 million in grant money to address the persistent inequities in the criminal justice system. Thinking of criminal justice reform as a philanthropic issue rather than a legal or political one has helped Zamora and her organization unlock new solutions to problems that seem to resist easy fixes. I spoke to Zamora back in March. She described how her brother's incarceration fueled her interest in criminal justice reform, why this issue isn't as simple as the left versus the right, and how philanthropic dollars can help keep more people out of American prisons. I'm Charlotte Alter, senior correspondent for Time, and this is Person of the Week. So I understand your family moved from Costa Rica. Tell me about that experience. Why did they come to the United States, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, so both of my older brothers were born there. And when my middle brother, Alex, was born, he was born with a really, really serious heart defect. And the doctors told my parents that he wasn't going to live, that he was only going to maybe survive a couple of days. And this was absolutely devastating for my folks.
Right.
Well, my brother Alex defied all odds.
Wow.
And he not only survived past a couple of days, he survived well into his childhood. And that's why my family moved to the States to get medical care for Alex. They just reached a point where the Costa Rican medical system just simply wasn't able to help him anymore. And so they moved back to Portland, Oregon, which is where my mom is originally from. And I came along a couple years later.
And this was a little bit of an adjustment for your family, right? Because your dad in Costa Rica had been an expert in agriculture and economics. He'd been doing work with the UN. But in the United States, his work was very different. So can you tell me what it was like for your family to adjust to this new environment?
Yeah, so my father was a brilliant, brilliant man. He was an expert in agriculture and economics. But when my family moved to the United States, he just was not taken seriously. And he could not get a job. And my grandmother, actually, my mom's mom, was a secretary at a paper company in the Port of Portland. And she was able to get my dad a job driving a lift truck in the warehouse. And for my father being as proud as he was, I think that probably took its toll. But he did what he had to do to provide for his family. He put his pride on the side. And 30 years later, he retired from that same company as the head of IT.
Wow. And your older brothers also kind of struggled a little bit to adjust to life in the United States. And your older brother's experience was very important to you turning to the work that you eventually decided to devote your life to. So tell me about Jorge David's experience in the United States.
Yeah, so Jorge was, I think, around kindergarten when my family moved to the States, and he didn't speak any English, and so he went to public school, and I think that he was bullied a lot. People used to call him names, make fun of his name. The kids were just kind of mean, and it kind of put him on a path, I think, and he started getting into trouble around 17, 18, experimenting with drugs, frankly, doing things that a lot of other kids did. But he just kind of kept on going down a bad path. And He ended up kind of cycling in and out of jail and then eventually went to prison. And my parents really shielded me from what was going on with my brother. And importantly, they shield what our family was experiencing from everybody else.
Right.
Because you have to imagine, we're an immigrant family. My father is trying really hard to fit in and to make sure that his kids have the best life and they don't have to endure the challenges that he endured when he came to this country. And so shielding the world from what was happening with my brother and the fact that he was getting arrested and going to jail, they did that well. So much that I didn't really understand what was going on. But I do remember this really pivotal moment in my childhood. I think my brother had been stealing from my parents and stealing from other people. There was a warrant out for his arrest, and my parents didn't know what to do. They were at a loss. They were at their wits' end. And they did the only thing that I think our society offers parents in that situation, which was to call the police and have their son arrested. And that's what they did. And so I remember, hearing a knock on the door one night and seeing police officers come into our house and handcuff my brother right down the stairs from my little pink bedroom with all my stuffed animals.
Wow.
And that is burned into my memory.
And how old were you at that point?
I was between 8 and 10, I would say, somewhere around there. I can't remember. This is something I've never talked to any of my family about.
Wow.
This is new. Sharing my family story is all very new.
Thank you for sharing it with us. And so what ended up happening with Jorge David? How did his life go after this arrest, and where is he now?
My brother is an amazing human, and he suffered a lot with his addiction. He is now in recovery, and he has been for a number of years. He moved to Costa Rica, maybe 12, 15 years ago, and he is absolutely thriving. And he is thriving right now in spite of the trauma that he faced being wrapped up in the criminal justice system. I am confident of that. And, it took all of us a long time to talk about what happened in those years, including my brother. He has made amends. He has apologized. And before I started sharing my family story, I asked him, Jorge, how would you feel if I started sharing our story, your story? And he said, Anna, if you sharing my story can help other people and actually help change the way things happen, the way the criminal justice system works, then I want you to share it loud and far.
Yeah. And ultimately, how long was he incarcerated for?
I believe he was in prison for less than a year, but he cycled in and out of local jail for a couple of years. I don't even know how many times.
Yeah.
So he experienced a lot.
So I want to get to you and your career. So you were at the ACLU for 10 years, and you were also doing a lot of work on California Prop 34 and various other laws that were being debated in California at that time. What did you learn from your time at the ACLU?
The ACLU and my work previous to the ACLU really taught me about the criminal justice system and how this massive, massive, massive system works or doesn't work.
Right.
And I really got a firsthand look at what the impacts of 50 years of mass criminalization and mass incarceration in this country have been, and how we criminalize things like poverty and mental illness and substance use disorder. But at the ACLU, I also learned about advocacy and what advocacy means and how social change works. It is a slow process. You really have to meet people where they are and understand how people see the world and what they care about and move people in a direction together. I found myself working in coalition with people that thought about the world very differently than I did and believed very different things than I did. But we agreed on this idea that the criminal justice system in America must do better. It must deliver on its promise of safety and justice. And it's our obligation to work together despite differences in order to see that happen.
Yeah. And so then in 2018, you left the ACLU to build a criminal justice investment program at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, also known as CZI, which is Dr. Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg's philanthropic organization. What was it like to finally have the funding that you believed this issue really needed?
Well, something else I learned at the ACLU is how important philanthropy is.
Right.
Philanthropy is at the foundation of social change. And I know that might be uncomfortable for some, but it is a reality. And I wanted to take what I had learned and apply it to how to invest philanthropic resources to maximize and scale impact.
Yeah.
And when I went over to the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, I felt like we were about to open the doors to making greater impact, durable impact on this issue. If we had made so much progress and impact with very little resources, what could we do if we had more resources? And we could invest those resources across the country.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about something you just said, which is that sort of philanthropy is the bedrock of social change. Not everybody would agree with you. Some people would say activism is the root of social change. Some people would say lawmakers are at the forefront of social change. Some people would say it's the courts. Some people would say it's culture. There's a lot of different arguments for what really drives social change. Why do you think it's philanthropy?
Well, I would say I agree with you in that all of those things are also very much part of social change. I think that advocacy is a really, really critical tool for criminal justice reform in particular, because without advocacy, creating the demand and taking this issue out of the darkness and putting it into the light and showing lawmakers and the general public that we have solutions, it's just easier to sweep it away. And advocacy requires philanthropic support. These are nonprofits that rely on philanthropic support to do their work. You know, even though I worked at the ACLU, which is arguably one of the most well-resourced nonprofits, particularly on criminal justice reform, the reality is this work was vastly underfunded.
Right.
And the advocates working on the ground across the country, from the death penalty to drug law reform, were doing so on shoestring budgets and really making a good amount of progress despite those shoestring budgets. And so that's why I think philanthropy and nonprofits and advocacy are so critically important to this issue in particular. And we absolutely need lawmakers. We need champions that are willing to take the risk and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't just lock everybody up and expect that to increase public safety and make people feel safe in their homes at night. Maybe we need to do something different. I want to try something different. That takes courage, and you need advocates to support those lawmakers. You need advocates to tell different stories to the media and help reporters see that there's other ways to cover crime and public safety. All of that requires philanthropic support to catalyze change.
More with Ana Zamora, the founder and CEO of the Just Trust, in a minute. So speaking of resources, in 2021, Dr. Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg announced they were investing $350 million into a new criminal justice reform organization called the Just Trust. And you are the founder and CEO of the Just Trust. What has that amount of money allowed you to accomplish with this organization?
It's a total game changer. It has allowed me to allocate resources to support the massive and diverse ecosystem of advocates and leaders working on this issue in places from Jackson, Mississippi to San Francisco, California, all the way up here to New York. I mean, literally across the country. And to date, we've invested over $100 million into the field. We have over 100 grantees. So we've made a lot of impact. And yes, $350 million is a historic investment in transforming the justice system, but it pales in comparison to the billion, with a B, billions of dollars of taxpayer money that we spend every year in this country to lift up a system that uses arrest, incarceration, and punishment as a way to improve public safety. And I don't think it's done a very good job. I think that our system of crime and punishment doesn't actually produce the public safety outcomes that it promises. And importantly, I don't think that it makes your everyday American, including myself, feel safer in our home at night or in our communities.
Yeah.
That's the problem that we need to solve with advocacy, with philanthropic investment, with leadership from lawmakers, and a leaning in from the general public.
So obviously criminal justice reform is not a new issue to anybody. How does this money represent a shift around criminal justice reform?
The $350 million investment from Mark and Priscilla, I think, catalyzes the next generation of criminal justice reform. And I think that the next generation of criminal justice reform needs to really focus on solutions. If we're not going to send people suffering from substance use disorder or mental health crisis or poverty, if we're not going to be sending people to jail and prison because we agree that that's not a great intervention, then what are we going to be doing? And one of the things I'm most proud of at the Just Trust is one of our programs called the Safer Communities Accelerator, where we are using some of these dollars to invest in community-based solutions that work hand in hand with local law enforcement to keep people who shouldn't have a criminal justice intervention from getting one.
Right.
Getting folks treatment, getting folks a bed to sleep in, getting folks services that are much better at helping them rather than sending them to jail.
Right.
And there's examples of this all over the country right now. And what I'm excited about is really supercharging these community-based solutions with resources and helping them to really show the world that what they're doing is working. And it's allowing local law enforcement more time to deal with the things that we need police to deal with, like solving serious crime.
Right. So I want to go back to something you were saying earlier about how so much of the focus with the Just Trust is on bipartisan solutions. I think people are familiar with some of the solutions coming out of some left-wing spaces around criminal justice reform. What are some of the solutions coming from more conservative corners that you think are actually pretty effective?
It's a really good question. I think that it's really important to note that being in a bipartisan posture doesn't mean that everybody agrees on everything. You know, criminal justice reform is this massive ecosystem of work, right? And you're going to have groups that are more left-leaning and groups that are more right-leaning feel comfortable and excited about tackling different aspects of that. I think for a more conservative audience, back-end solutions are really, really important. So, for example, somebody that comes out of prison with a felony conviction faces legal barriers to living after prison. Things like getting a job is really hard, getting sustainable housing, going back to school, being able to qualify for grants and things like that. All of that is really, really hard. Even volunteering at your kid's school. So these are real barriers, not to mention the stigma. So our more conservative advocates and grantees have made a lot of progress, really making the case that when people come out of prison, we as a society should be doing everything to remove those barriers and clear that path so that they may choose a path to thrive and get back in their community, contributing, and live a happy, healthy life. So a lot of our right-of-center partners have really focused on that. I think there's a lot of reasons why a more conservative advocate or lawmaker would care about this issue. I have grantees that come to this from a deeply held faith, a belief in redemption, for example, and a belief that the Bible calls us all to help people who are incarcerated.
So I want to ask about sort of where this work fits in the conversation about criminal justice that has been going on pretty intensely now for nearly 5 years since the murder of George Floyd. There have been some big debates about how to address some of the inequities in our criminal justice system. And some advocates want to abolish the police. Some want to reform the police. What do you think is the most effective path forward?
I believe that right now our justice system really wields one tool, right? It's the tool of punishment. Think of it this way. It's kind of like the healthcare system, right? What if our healthcare system used one medical intervention for everything? Whether you scrape your knee or you have cancer, you're getting surgery. I see the criminal justice system as kind of like that, which is they have one tool, which is prison or incarceration, right? For everything. I want our criminal justice system to have a much larger toolbox to first and foremost prevent crime. And like I just said, when crime happens, which it will, there's a whole nother toolbox with a suite of interventions that can come into play to help make sure crime doesn't happen again. And I think that is possible. I don't think that it requires starting from scratch. I think that our local police especially play a really, really important role in our communities. But I don't think they should be tasked with doing everything. I don't think the police can do this alone, nor should we ask them to do this alone. So, for example, this incredible program in Eugene, Oregon, it's called CAHOOTS. It's a mobile crisis response. And what they do is when there is somebody that is having a mental health crisis, maybe it's somebody who is holding a knife and meandering through traffic shouting, let's say.
Right.
In most jurisdictions, the thing to do would be to call the police, and an officer would come and try to manage somebody having a mental health crisis. In Eugene, Oregon, CAHOOTS is called, and a civilian mobile crisis unit will come, and they help diffuse the situation and get folks help and support that they need, and then follow that through. And the police are on call if something escalates and there is an actual public safety threat, the police will be there in a heartbeat. And I think that while the idea of mobile crisis response, it doesn't feel that innovative, but it is massively effective. And these programs exist in Eugene, Oregon, and other places, but they don't have a lot of funding and they aren't scaled across the country. And that's where we need to put our effort.
Yeah. And obviously, mass incarceration does not affect all Americans equally. Black and Hispanic Americans are disproportionately incarcerated, disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system. How do you think about that in terms of where you send your grants?
Yes. So it is absolutely true that our criminal justice system disproportionately impacts communities of color, particularly Black communities. But I also think that it is a system that disproportionately traps poor people. And so we think about both of those things in our grant making and in our work. And one of the things that I think makes my organization unique is we have really zeroed in on criminal justice reform in the American South. I personally believe that we have to transform our justice systems in the Deep South because, in part, of the acuteness at which racial disparities are seen and felt in those states and in those communities, as well as poverty. You know, Mississippi, for example, may not have an incarcerated population as big as California, but I think that it needs interventions. It needs collaboration. We need to get under the hood and really understand what's happening there and work with lawmakers and work with the public to find new solutions.
And how do you measure what success looks like for your grantees? What are you looking for in terms of demonstrable impact?
It's a hard question to answer because these things take a long time. And I think one of the challenges with philanthropy is this desire to measure and demonstrate impact in too short of a time frame.
Interesting.
And all that does is it pushes nonprofits to go too far too fast. And I think that can have really negative consequences. So for me, it's about building an ecosystem of organizations that each play a different role, right? So some organizations are going to be really focused on narrative change and really helping the public see that there are other solutions out there to improve public safety. Another organization is going to be focused on legislative advocacy, like insider baseball, going into the Capitol, lobbying lawmakers, right? Another organization is going to be organizing impacted communities and bringing those stories and those individuals to the Capitol to talk to lawmakers or share their stories with the public. So I firmly believe that we need that ecosystem, and all of those groups need to have funding in order to advance this work forward in a pace that makes sense with politics and culture, knowing that sometimes we will go the other direction. This is not for the weak-hearted.
Right.
This is hard work, A. B, you do lose a lot doing this work. And C, just when you think you're making a lot of progress and you've reached that tipping point, sometimes things go in the other direction and you have to persevere. And when things start going in the other direction, that's when you got to really drill down, stick to your guns, and keep pushing forward.
Anna, it's been so great talking to you about your life story and your family and your career and the Just Trust organization. We've learned so much about the criminal justice system and how it works. But now I want to ask you some more personal questions about your everyday life in a segment we like to call The Last Time. So, when is the last time you spoke to your oldest brother, Jorge David?
I spoke with Jorge David, within the last week. We text a lot on WhatsApp.
Okay.
And he has been building a incredible rancho. And a rancho is like an outdoor kitchen and hangout space at my mom's house in Costa Rica. And so he was just telling me about this incredible project that he's been working on.
That sounds unbelievable. When's the last time you watched a cop show?
I don't think I have watched a cop show. I don't watch a lot of TV that isn't like rom-com. I'll tell you the last show I watched.
Sure, I'd love to hear it.
It was The Summer I Turned Pretty.
Oh, that was a good one.
I know. I'm a little embarrassed to admit it, but
No.
I loved it. See, when you do this work, it's hard. And at the end of the day, sometimes you just want something that makes you smile and makes you happy. So no cop shows for me.
We all need that. When is the last time you saw a play?
My stepdaughter was just cast. This was a couple of months ago. It was at the end of last year. She was cast in her first play, and she was cast as Oliver in Oliver. And so we watched an hour version, especially for 8 to 12-year-olds. And so I got to see my stepdaughter sing her little heart out. It was absolutely magical.
When's the last time you played with your dog, Blueberry, outside?
Yesterday. Yesterday, before I came here to New York, we have some trails down at the bottom of our house, and it is Blueberry's absolute favorite place. And
my God.
I love watching her play down there and run her little heart out.
And when's the last time you were in Costa Rica?
I was in Costa Rica 2 summers ago. It's been a while since I've been back. I've been a little busy with work.
Yes.
But I took my wife and my stepdaughter there for the first time. It was actually my wife's first international trip. So it was a really big deal.
Wow.
And she got to meet my brother, and it was a wonderful family reunion.
Wonderful. Anna, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really learned a lot from this conversation. This was super, super interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte.
If you want to learn more about the powerful work Anna Zamora is doing, you can visit thejusttrust.org. Thank you so much for listening to Person of the Week. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd love to hear from you. So send your tips or thoughts on our show to personoftheweek@time.com. I'm Charlotte Alter. See you next week.
Person of the Week is hosted by Charlotte Alter. It's produced by Nina Bisbano and Allison Bailey. Our senior producer is Ursula Summer. Our story editor is Katie Feather. This episode was mixed by Joe Plord. Our theme music was composed by Billy Libby. Joseph Frischmuth is our fact-checker. Person of the Week is a co-production of Time Studios and Sugar 23. At Time, our executive producers are Dave O'Connor, Michael Erlinger, and Sam Jacobs. At Sugar 23, our executive producers are Mike Mayer, Michael Sugar, and Liam Billingham. Sasha Matthias is the head of audio at Time. You can find us online at time.com/personoftheweek and wherever you get your podcasts.